So, hi everyone, and welcome again to our Framing Projects for Success. My guest for today is Mitch Winkler, an opportunity framing workshop facilitator, a structural engineer who spent over 36 years working for the largest oil and gas giant company, working on many complex projects based in Houston. Mitch, thank you so much for being here today, and I am very grateful to chat with you today.
Oh, my pleasure, Ivana.
Mitch, well, how about you introduce yourself? I know I maybe missed something. Tell us what's your background and tell us briefly about yourself, please.
Okay, so my background in brief is I'm trained as a civil, or I was trained as a civil structural engineer, and got lured to Shell. This goes back to 1981. The work that they told me that they were doing, that they needed help with, was really interesting. So that changed my career path, you might say. I was I think I was all set to go into a more traditional civil engineering type of role, and it was really a 36-year adventure. I started out doing engineering work. This is a whole story into itself, but I was designing and helping to construct gravel islands in the Alaskan Arctic offshore, which was really zoomy work for a civil engineer. But then that then took me to R&D, and I had a pretty good run there. Then that was sort of a natural time. Well, just I started to get more and more involved in deep water projects. So really a switch from Arctic to deep water. And the work that I was doing, I was just really helping to support different development options. So this is really going to play into decision making and framing. But I was starting to, from the R&D side, looking at these different decision development options, and then that took me to New Orleans from Houston. Where I was in a development planning role for about 10 years, starting out as an individual contributor and ultimately leading the team over there. So I was responsible for development planning for the Gulf of Mexico. And, as part of that journey, I was exposed to, well, it was actually first to the concept of decision quality. And that was back in the mid 90s in my R&D role. And we can talk about that because that ultimately became one of the key tools in my toolkit. And then later on, I want to say around 2004, that's when the company first started to roll out opportunity framing. And they're very complementary processes. So when we were given the role of rolling out framing, it had very many of the same attributes of decision quality, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But anyway, that was that 10 years in development planning was really seminal, to my development, in process design, process implementation, and all the problems of change management with processes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I finished up my career moving back to R&D. For about another 10 years, and retired as the Arctic technical subject matter expert, and that was 2017. And I've been retired for nearly 7 years now. So that's my potted career history.
Wow. And I know we spoke once before, you're not retired fully. I'm glad to hear that you're giving back and you're using what you've learned doing a lot of framing in other sectors. But let me just first ask you about how did you get involved in framing? You mentioned, was it 2004 when the company was looking at framing? So tell me, how did you personally get involved, and what was your role in opportunity framing process?
Yes. So I'd actually like to go back and talk about the 1990s, because that was when I was exposed to this concept of decision quality. And it's very the decision quality is really this concept that you can quantify the process of making a decision. So you can't control the outcome of a decision, but you can actually break the decision down into multiple steps or attributes, and you can quantify just how well you have, say, prosecuted those attributes, and ultimately give you a sense of, are you making a good decision? And when you look at those attributes, and they're typically 6, it's around the problem frame. Do we know what problem we're solving? Do we have do we know the scope? Do we understand our givens? Do we know what we're not working on? Then it's around reliable information. It's the known knowns. What do we not know? It's really digging, deep into and looking far and wide. Have we turned over all the right rocks? It's then creative alternatives, because a decision requires options. So it's having multiple options, and presumably some that are creative. It's next around values and trade-offs. What's important? What do we, and ultimately in the solution, what is going to deliver value, and also what trade-offs are we willing to make? It's logically correct reasoning. So it's having some methodology that ties it all together. That's more than just pros and cons. And ultimately, it's commitment to action, because if there's a decision, someone has to take that decision. And if they're not ready to take the decision, you might as well not have gone through the work. So these are that's decision quality. Those are the 6 attributes. And I think there's a lot of similarity there, with opportunity framing, which is really, where do we want to be? Where are we now? How do we get there? So the 2 tools really complement one another. So I was exposed to decision quality back in the mid-1990s. Shell at the time had hired SDG, Strategic Decision Group, to help them with a facilities upgrade problem. And I don't know all the details, but they ended up offering some of their decision quality courses, and I was able to join one of those courses. And that was really a key event in my journey, so to speak. Just because of say the skills and the insight that I walked away from that workshop with. So that was, say, the mid-1990s, and it really wasn't until 2004 that I saw framing for the first time. But meanwhile, what decision quality gave me was really this structure for facilitating a discussion, because those 6 attributes allowed you to do was to take a free-for-all discussion and to break it up into parts, and to then, through each part, to facilitate a discussion and around each of those parts, or to do it over a period of time. Mm-hmm. So by the time I saw framing, it wasn't new. I had used the decision quality multiple times, and so a little bit of history there.
I want to drill you a little bit more to understand what it actually looked like. Like, if you did decision quality, what did you use it for? Was it part of your gate review? Was it just part of the way they wanted, like the company wanted everyone to think about? What did you use it for?
Yeah, so I used it for many things. Whether it was looking at different, and then it was interesting. This was in a period of time when the company, I'd say, was just, say from the 1990s to the 2000s, process was always there, but it was really, I'd say, over that decade, it became much more formalized and systematic. So, in those, in the 1990s, we knew that, say, if you were looking at a development, if there was a development opportunity, that you needed to look at options that spanned the uncertainties that were out there. did we have a systematic, later we moved into a process that had identify and assess, select, define, execute. Was it neatly written down like that in those early days? Probably not, but people knew that those were the steps that needed to be followed. So, you're back to your question, where I was able to apply decision quality was, for example, just sort of in my adjunct role, helping to evaluate concepts, because what I was able to do was to apply the decision quality framework to help put those different concepts that we were looking at in context, compare them, to one another in a fairly rigorous manner. So it wasn't just, someone that was shouting the loudest saying, we need to do this, but actually helping to, again, through working through it systematically, deliver insight. And then I think one example, which is kind of one of my favorite stories on decision quality, I was actually asked to, it was an overseas project. It was an opportunity. It was a development opportunity in Norway. There were multiple partners, and the team that I was asked to help was they were responsible for system selection. So they needed to their charge was to ultimately recommend the development concept for this oil and gas opportunity. I got called over to help them out, and I brought the decision quality framework with me. I had prepared a process that we would follow, and that started with information sharing, like you would do in a framing, just going through the foundational elements of where are we, what are the issues, et cetera, et cetera. And then with that grounding, then I was going to then take it over and start a facilitated conversation, again, with many of the same elements of as opportunity framing. And ultimately, where I wanted to get the group to was to develop, what I would call, or what's called a strategy table, where you would have, here are the key decisions for the options. For instance, what's the facility size? What's the throughput? Is it a floating option or a subsea option? Among others. So the strategy table would be what were each of those, key decisions, and then what are the options, and then look at different weaves, if you will, through the table that would then lead to creative alternatives that could be evaluated. And this is one of my favorite stories, because I got over there, we had a morning of grounding presentations. I took over, and within maybe, I don't think it was more than 5 minutes of, when I started, the team leader stood up and said, I don't know where this is going. And I don't want to spend any time on this. This is not going to get us to where we need to be. So we spent the rest of that afternoon, the group just played around with pet processes. Oh yeah, I think we should do this, and that would go on for an hour or two. And it was clear that wasn't going to deliver the needed product, the needed deliverable. Somebody else had an idea. I'm just sitting there kind of watching this in amazement. So I stayed after the meeting, and I put some kind of took stock of where we were, what was the people were struggling with, and I just filled out a strategy table on my own. And then the next morning, we all came back. I put this up. It must have been that at the time we still had view graphs, so I put a view graph up. Or maybe we had a projector, because I'm not sure how I would have made the view graph. But I put the strategy table up, and then everybody's like, yeah, that's what we need. And And it's like, gosh, we would have gotten there if you had exercised a little bit of patience. But I think what it, if I were to generalize, what it shows is that process works. That we would have gotten the outcome that they needed. It's also as a lesson in facilitation, and I think this is one of the challenges with these tools, that if you want to take someone through all of the steps and you get too down into the process detail, it's an immediate turnoff. You really have to focus on outcomes. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And in some ways, try to disguise the sort of the process part of it, sort of the sort of the nuts and the bolts that are important to have, but not everybody necessarily needs to know, all of the jargon and say the format that's behind the curtain, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, that was the great illustration, Mitch, and I can relate to that. Let's talk about a little bit what is opportunity framing, for you. How do you now, when you retired from Shell, you go to different companies, how would you define what opportunity framing is?
So I fall back on the model, and this was the Shell model, and I think it's fairly universal, but there's the three components. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? And what opportunity framing is about, it's about intentionally, raising issues, asking and answering questions in each of those areas, with how do we get there last, to deeply understand an opportunity. Really, where framing, where it really, holds its own is in complex problems that are, that have elements of technical, organizational, economic, political, environmental, social issues. So where there's not one, there's just this whole diversity of issues that impact, the problem that one is solving. And the value of framing is to, I think, as you've alluded to, it's bringing it's the issue raising. It's creating awareness among the different stakeholders as to how the issues integrate, and it's building alignment for ultimately how you're going to move forward. But, well, I shouldn't say but, and it's once you really understand where you are, where you want to be, it's delivering, or it's developing that project plan that sets priorities. Mm-hmm. And clearly, in these complex projects, what you often see is that certainly sometimes the non-technical issues can dominate. And where these processes are so important is it's really helping to set priorities around what needs to be worked on and when. Mm-hmm. And then it's having that clarity that by with this work plan, you have the likelihood that you're going to achieve some success at the end of the rainbow.
How would you define the most valuable outcome from framing?
That's a good question, and I guess I'm fairly. I think it's having a plan. I think it's having priorities. That plan could be a decision-driven roadmap. It could be the priorities that then would ultimately form that roadmap. It's having really specific actions of what's going to get done. I've seen a lot of framings. I'm sure you have too, where we've spent a week filling up flip charts with really good information. And, I think that sadly, that's the case where you do 80% of the work, but get 20% of the value. because you have to really go that, you have to turn. I mean, yeah, people walking out of it feeling like, yeah, I've learned something new. I know what, what this other, discipline or functional group is doing, that's good. But if there's not specific actions around it, if there's not specific deliverables, then you might as well not have done it, because the risk is people are just going to go back to their, again, individual disciplines or functions and do what they think needs to be done. So you have to ultimately, in my view, you have to translate it, the framing into something actionable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting what you just said. You talk about 1 week of workshop, on site or off site, where people get together from different disciplines to explore and frame the opportunity. Is this what it takes? Like from your experience, did you do it in 1 day? Like, did you? Because obviously, initially, when people are not as familiar with the process, it might take a week. A lot of the clients I have now, they want to get it done in a day or half, and and sometimes you lock yourself to this uncomfortable agreements, and you and I know that it's really those actions, and I probably make some big mistakes in the past as well, with not driving clarity on actions. What do you think is the ultimate duration?
That's a really, that's the real challenge, because I can talk about, what's nice about the process, I guess, maybe starting off, is it's scalable. So, whether, if we're talking about planning a family vacation, that's you can use it for that, or you can use it for a multi-billion-dollar, project or opportunity. So it scales. So, there are situations where, and I can talk about one where just doing a whiteboard framing and over the course of 2 hours, yielded significant insight. There are projects, just because of their complexity, again, across this, the technical, economic, commercial, organizational, political spectrum, that really require, it's not just the deep discussion, but it's all the inputs that require, multiple days. And the challenge is always, that groups want to short circuit, doing it right. And so it's it's just an age-old challenge, finding that happy medium of what works. And the other aspect too is it's getting the right people in the room, because ideally, when you do a framing, you in the ideal world, you allocate a certain amount of time, you identify who needs to be there, in an ideal world, you're having, part of the decision makers are there, and they should be there, nearly full time. But what invariably happens, they're popping in, popping out. People are, they have other things that are going on. There's the work needs to be done. And so it's the age-old challenge. I think, as individuals, companies, see the value of these, see how they can ultimately use to allow better outcomes. That's the way that you really create the change, where it becomes a definite part of the work, versus an afterthought. But there are, those challenges, have been out there, and I'm sure still are. But you can, the other aspect about framing is, even for complex problems, you can play around with them. You can, with a team or individuals, and that's a way to develop some quick insight that can be used. You can then bootstrap that to say, yes, maybe we need to do something larger. But I think I'm rambling a little bit because I'm thinking about, my experience. But what also helps in these framings, it's having individuals in the room who have been through it before, who can speak up or speak out to the value of the process, that have some influence, some respect among the others in the room, to say, yeah, let's we need to stick with this. I've seen this work before. And if I think back to my experience that I talked about earlier with that oil and gas opportunity, if there was somebody in that room that said, yeah, I've seen this work, then we wouldn't have played around with pet processes.
What makes framing successful? And you kind of covered the time that it's sort of scalable, and then you talk about the people, to have really the right people and have some champions about the process so they can sort of really support that method, so you don't really have people wondering why we're here today. What else could you say that needs to happen during the workshop to make this worthwhile for people?
I think in the workshop, I think it's just if people have a sense of where it's going. I mean, I think again, thinking back to workshops that I've facilitated or helped design, when you say, okay, so now we're going to talk about all the value drivers. Now we're going to talk about critical success factors, and we're going to fill up a flip chart. Now we're going to go through SWOT. And I think ultimately, that's all great. That's intentional issue raising. If somebody can go back and can post-process that into something meaningful. What probably does not happen enough, but needs to happen more, is to kind of stand back, and as you're creating this these issues, that there's also some discussion around the so what. So that people can see, it's not just, we're not just kind of filling these flip charts and putting this stuff out there for the sake of it, but it's helping the attendees connect with, well, what's the importance here? How does it ultimately fit into what we're trying to do here? Mm-hmm. I think as a I haven't had the opportunity to do this, but that would probably, that may be something that I would want to try, if I was, if and when the next time I facilitate something, either formal, likely informally, but it's to really, make those connections. Maybe you're not ready to, to hardwire anything yet, but it's at least giving people a sense of how the puzzle, it's really puzzle pieces, how the puzzle pieces are going to fit together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so looks like, Mitch, you and I have used this in the oil and gas industry for big capital projects, whether it's a greenfield or brownfield. But let's look at outside of the oil and gas. Do you think this is something that could be applied outside of the oil and gas industry? And if so, what could be some of those conditions or characteristics or instances that framing could be a good fit?
Well, it's a universal tool. It really applies to to any problem. And the one that I cite is that I guess going back from retirement for me has been a combination of fitness, travel, and volunteering. And one of the volunteer opportunities that I got into was it was called VMS, Venture Mentoring Service, and this was a program here in Houston that was under the auspices of MD Anderson, which is the big cancer hospital. The VMS program was actually developed by MIT, and there was a group here that really transported it and started a local VMS program supporting MD Anderson. And really what we were doing was entrepreneurial mentoring. So we were working with with folks in the life sciences. So this could be doctors, researchers that had ideas that they wanted, that they saw that could be commercialized, and the ideas could be therapeutics or medical devices. And what we were doing as a volunteer organization, we would work in teams and work with the PI, the principal investigator, or others, to really help them move their opportunity forward. And what I saw clearly was, and I don't really, the whole content was new to me, but the challenges, were the same. And this, those of us that had oil and gas backgrounds that were part of this volunteer group, saw the connection. They were the same challenges that we saw, with oil and gas, projects or technology development. So, I think that was, one clear, immediate, realization is that, yes, new content, but same old challenges. So as part of working in VMS, what I did very, probably within a year or so of starting, my, volunteer, activity, was to start working with the leadership team, at the time. And I introduced them, to this concept of framing, as something that maybe we can bring in to VMS, because what we were seeing happening was the age-old problems like you see elsewhere. People work on what they want to work on. Priorities are kind of all jumbled up. There's not a clear definition or description of what success looks like. So there was clear opportunity to introduce framing, but the step to even get there was one day, and I remember this vividly. I was down in the medical center, and there was just a small group of us that were sitting around just to, to kick around. VMS had been in existence at MD Anderson for several years now. It was, there was a lot of activity, a lot of enthusiasm. There were some good things that were happening, but the question was, how do we take this to another level? We realized there were some gaps here. So what I did that afternoon with the group, and I think this was in about a 2-hour span, was I just, I got up to the whiteboard and just started, really asking these questions about success. And not using any props per se, but just some leading questions, and just started drawing on the whiteboard. And where are we now? So we talked about the strengths, the weaknesses of the program. What were the opportunities? What were some of the threats that were out there? And very, very quickly, we had a we had a roadmap of sorts. We had some more. We had structure around, again, what were they trying to achieve, and what were some of the things that could be done to really, in this case, amp up use in VMS. Mm-hmm. One of them being a stage gate process, introduction of a stage gate process, because right now there was no structure around where an opportunity was, and this would be a way to to help bring context to where the idea was. And also that, why is that important? Because it's around the resources, it's around the decisions that should be brought to bear. But then the other, what also came out of it was the opportunity for developing and implementing a VMS specific version of opportunity framing. Because again, ventures PIs were coming in and saying, "Yeah, hey, I'd like I'd really like to get help from VMS, with this." And then we would have meetings, and they would be kind of just talk shops of sorts, and the the opportunity with bringing opportunity framing in was, okay, when the PI comes in with the idea, let's have that initial structured conversation. Let's use that to build this deep understanding that we can then use to help them, mature their opportunity in a systematic way, and work on the right things. So we were in a nice place. I mean, we're actually starting to build this structure out. We had put together an opportunity framing training class, and unfortunately, things organizationally fell apart. MD Anderson decided that the program was no longer a strategic fit. It changed hands, and ultimately the work, the improvements that we had planned, were never implemented. But it was, it's an example to me, just where, showing that it works, and that if MD, the MD Anderson, they wanted to move on, that was fine. But if they had stayed the course, this all would have played out differently. And
yeah, I think you proved, Mitch, that you can take this process, this workshop, and really use it anywhere else. Because really, ultimately, I like to say it's a problem-solving workshop. But what you just said, that the program didn't go ahead, and I can reflect back in back in the organization I work for. It really needs that championship, right? Like,
yeah, I'd be careful. I'd be careful here. I think what really caused this to stop was really a strategic decision that MD Anderson took. So that just by deciding that they wanted that VMS, the larger program, was no longer a strategic fit. That's when this ended. So it didn't stop because somebody said, this is just not an efficient or an effective process. So I don't want to leave that impression. It was really just because the MD Anderson got out of the VMS business.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Mitch, I want to ask you, I can't wait to ask you questions around decision making. I know you're passionate about decision making, and I want to know from you how to make good decisions. How do you make good decisions?
Yeah, so I can't say that I'm it's funny. I think in my personal life, I tend to I don't apply necessarily what I can preach or what I can speak to. So there's a bit of hypocrisy there. Sometimes I'm just more just sort of rash in making a purchase versus exploring all the options. I started my undergraduate degree is from the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, and the senior civil engineering students there do a capstone project. So this is this is solving. They're asked to address a real world problem, like an improvement to a street that requires a new that has significant drainage issues. That might be or intersection that needs upgrading. And what having and I think I was given the opportunity during COVID to join their final presentations, and I realized they could benefit from decision quality in terms of helping them get to their final products. So now what I've been doing, and I've done this about 4 times now, is in the fall semester is to give it ends up being about a 90-minute talk on decision making to them, and where I go through the elements of decision quality. But what I also emphasize to them is that this is a way that they can also structure their presentation when they're talking to, well, it's to the faculty, but to their client. What I was seeing is that what really kind of prompted this in my head was I sat through presentations of work that they had done, and it took me 10, 15 minutes to figure out what problem are they solving here. So with decision quality, what I try to emphasize to them is that there is this process out there that where one can quantify the process and really test the quality, the goodness of the decision that's being taken. But what the decision quality also offers is it's a format, it's a structure for presenting one's results, because you can start off and say, here's the problem we've been asked to solve. Here's the scope that we're looking at. Here are the givens that you've told us that need to be that they cannot be deviated from. Then you can move on. This is the information that we looked at. Here are the risks. Here's the uncertainties. Here's what we've done to reduce them. Based on this information, we've come up with these alternatives. These are you've told us these are the values that are important to you. We've also talked to you about these trade-offs that you might be willing to make. And then, the next piece would be, and here's how we've integrated the information and come up with our final recommendation. And so, what the decision quality, does here is that it's a way, to assess, again, the quality of ultimately that final recommendation, but it's a structured way to communicate what you've done, to someone, and presumably through this, I've heard it referred to as a snaking process, but a decision-driven process, where you have this regular ongoing dialogue, with a leadership team, with a client, ultimately they're ready to commit because they've been part of the journey and they've seen the pieces along the way and have been able to, to give their nod that, yes, this looks good. We're in concurrence with, with how you've, how you've put this together. Mm-hmm. So it's a really, it can be a very, quantitative, decision quality, down in the weeds. There's lots of questions you can ask at each of the steps, but it's also just a framework for logically thinking, logically presenting. It's just one of those really simple tools that that you can get 80% of the value with 20% of the work.
Yeah.
Decision quality, it can also, you can go off and into deep into decision analysis, value of information, as part of the decision process. But I think just the qualitative aspects can deliver a lot of value in themselves.
But what could you tell about the challenges, because every process will have some challenges? Maybe the process is too analytical. Like,
I think a starting point is that and I don't know what your observation is here, but these processes, whether they're decision quality or opportunity framing, I don't think that they grew up and they really took root in petrochemicals, oil and gas, as an example. And why? And I guess my hypothesis is that when you look at oil and gas decisions, what are they? What are the characteristics? The characteristics are a huge amount of uncertainty. You think about subsurface uncertainty. Is it oil? Is it gas? How big is it? What are the flow rates? What's the product that's going to be ultimately coming to the composition? What comes to the facility? So there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and then there's also a huge financial risk. If you don't if you get it right, these can be huge money-making projects. If you get it wrong, there are billions of dollars, that's at risk. So, my view is that just the nature of oil and gas, petrochemicals, I think pharmaceuticals, it's a very similar, similar types of issues, that have driven these really these structured processes. So it's not we can come back to the question you asked, but I think one of the challenges that's out there is that these processes are not well known, out of these industries. And I think that there's a huge opportunity scope because, as we've talked about, they're universally applicable. So really for any problem, any industry, these are tools in the toolkit that are just that are not being used. I spoke, it's interesting, the timing of this interview. Earlier this week, I was the technical speaker at the local American Society of Civil Engineering, the Houston branch meeting. So I was the warm-up act before the main meeting, and my topic was decision making, and specifically improving front-end decision making. And I had a pretty, I want to say about 20 to 30 civil engineers in attendance. And, just from the nods, from the body language that I was talking, what I was talking about was really new to them. I mean, not that they don't employ some of those concepts, just as part of their processes, but I think the way I packaged it and having the systemization, if you will, was new to them. And, I think it's, just like the engineering students at UMass Dartmouth, there's huge, in my mind, running room for these tools, out there, for, to deliver, better results and to do it faster. The challenge is it's they're just not known. And then I think there's the cognitive bias out there, because they're oil and gas, they're very specific to that. They don't apply here, or, that's a dirty industry. We don't want to borrow from it. So there's, you mentioned biases, and I'm just an enthusiastic amateur here, but going back to when I was first exposed to decision quality in the 1990s, I was also exposed at the time to the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, psychologist, economics, and in this area of cognitive biases. And what I've come to to really believe, realize over time is that work processes, whether it's decision quality, opportunity framing, decision-driven planning, or road mapping, what they're all about is overcoming, cognitive biases. And what are cognitive biases? An example would be the representativeness bias, and that's really just and this is just how the brain works, is that you make superficial you make superficial connections in terms of similarities or patterns, and those superficial similarities or patterns are then what you run on, and you start building your foundation on. And you're not asking, more detailed, deeper questions. And if you, I would encourage, your listeners to, just to search on cognitive, biases, and the list is really really lengthy. Another one, and this was used in that training class on decision quality that I attended back in the 1990s. It was on the anchoring bias. And the illustration there, and I don't do a very good job of asking the question, but it has to do with, when was Attila the Hun born? And I think he was born in the year 1000. What do you think? And then I tried this the other day, and again, I don't do it very well, but people said, well, maybe 1,000. Somebody said 800. Well, it turns out it's 400 CE, current era. And the problem, the anchoring biases is that immediately after I say, I think he was born in the year 1000, well, that puts a marker out there. And you don't know whether I'm right or not, but, I mentioned that, so that anchors you. And really what you want to do, so the work of Tversky and Kahneman and Tversky, was really around, in the area of judgment and decision making. And, and their work really shows that humans by and large are flawed and are not good at judgment and are not good at decision making because they suffer from these cognitive biases. So like in the case of judgment, you're much better off if you want to get a value is to ask somebody for a range of numbers, versus a specific number, because a specific number is almost the kiss of death because that becomes the anchor point. But if you're asking them, well, how, if you want to, if there's an uncertainty, how bad can it be? How good can it be? And you kind of really then talk through, those end members, that range then gets people out of the having the blinders on.
I remember many times project manager would come, or I would say project executive would come, and he would say, I want to get this job done in 12 months, and it's like what you just said. And the thinking starts from the moment the first person shows up with a number. And again, that might be sometimes positive, right? Because it can really create a lot of good thinking and maybe even generate some solutions and advancements. But I like what you said, that we need to ask deeper questions to understand the context before we put those numbers that anchor like the whole project team. So, well, thank you, Mitch. I've got one question because I'm so curious about you as a person. Have you always been someone who would bring people together or not? So who is Mitch Winkler?
Yeah. I don't know whether I would call myself a facilitator. I mean, I never had any training, in facilitation per se. For me, it was all, on the job. I think, it's hard to go back. I think that whole, learning about decision quality in the 1990s, I think that was, that was just a big moment, for me, because up until then, I was very, I liked solving problems. I liked getting to the bottom of things. I mean, I can go back and look at some of my earlier technical work at Shell, and some real detailed areas where I drilled down and ultimately, peeled back the onion a lot further than others wanted to go, and we got some deeper insight into into an important engineering value that we were using, at the time. So I think I had that, that desire to really to deeply understand. And I think what the light bulb went off is when I saw the decision quality, when I saw that, here was a structure, that one could use to bring order to chaos. And then not minding to jump in. I guess I think I probably had even today, I know from my family, I don't do small talk well. That's an often comment. I mean, I kind of like to get to the solve something, not just. Yes, you can't always answer everything in the conversation, but try to bring things together. So I probably, had that inclination, going back 30 years ago when I, first, and then that plus the structure, it all came together. So I, and what you also see is that when when you're willing to, okay, be a facilitator, you also get the power of the pen. So, it gives you a lot of, you get a lot of control, and, and that just, helps to, to build on itself. So that's a little bit of how I kind of walked into it. But I'd say it was really around, just trying to bring order, to messy discussions. And, I just had the willingness to, to step in, when others were, just happy to be participants.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Mitch. I like that. Someone who wants to bring the process to messy conversations. That's awesome. That's really great. I mean, what a pleasure listening to your story. You sharing your perspectives, your experiences, and you're not stopping at your industry. You're really bringing and promoting opportunity framing workshops. So thank you so much.